Good morning.
Good morning, Frank.
Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time you're watching this. My name is Frank Friedman. I am here on behalf of the Nashville Bar Association Historical Committee Oral History Division. I'm here with my old friend Jim Hofstetter, and we're going to do his oral history. I've known Jim for 50 years plus. He was one of the first lawyers that I met when I started practicing law. And here we go. Would you state your name for the interview, please, sir?
James Carson Hofstetter.
And you were born when?
July 31st, 1949.
In Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville, Tennessee at St. Thomas Hospital, which at that time was, I believe, was located on Church Street.
Yes, the old St. Thomas. I remember it well. There are pictures of the old St. Thomas hanging in St. Thomas West today.
Okay.
I remember that building well. And would you tell us about your family, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, etc.?
Okay, well, let's see. My grandfather, Oscar B. Hofstetter, was an attorney here in Nashville, and he got his 50-year award. And he was married to Marguerite Sanders, which is the not the Sanders manufacturing company, but anyway, the Charles Sanders company. That was that family. And then I didn't really know that much about my mother's family. Her father was named Benjamin Franklin Carson, and I never knew much about him. I just know he was sort of strict and very opinionated. Her mother was Annagale Litter Carson, and she was part of the Litter family, the Litter laboratories. There were a lot of doctors, a litter of doctors, and I think a lot of them taught at Vanderbilt. And they had a lab that was up the top of Second Avenue North, across. That's Howard School, isn't it?
Yes.
It's up there. Yes, it was right across from there. And as luck would have it, when I was an attorney and I was in a bankruptcy trustee, I got a Chapter 7 case as trustee for a restaurant that went out of business in that very same building. And I was telling my mother about it. Oh, she thought that was great.
Everything changes.
Yeah, that's
Everything
right.
changes.
And then, all right, so then my mother was a Carson. She went to Ward Belmont School, and then she went to Vanderbilt, and she finished second in her class to George Cates' older sister, and they were very close friends. I'm trying to think what her name was, but she was a very good friend of my mother's, and then my mother went on to teach a lab at Ward Belmont. She was a biology and chemistry major and minor, and she taught there for a year. And the headmaster at Ward Belmont at the time was Mr. Benedict, who was Andrew Benedict's father. Andrew Benedict was the longtime president, CEO of First American Bank here in Nashville, and was one of the top executives in Nashville, and a member of the board of trust at Vanderbilt. Anyway, Mr. Benedict was a very strict man, and Mr. Benedict did not, when he found out my mother was getting married, he didn't like that. He wanted all the female teachers there to be single. So he suggested that she not work there anymore after she got married. So, and my father, of course, he went to Father Ryan High School just like I did, and he graduated. I guess that would be in 1932. And then he went on to Vanderbilt and was there for 5 years. But back then you went 3 years to undergrad and 2 years to law school, and you got to LLB. And so then he worked for some company. It was called the OPA, and I'm not quite sure what that was. I think it was some sort of a government thing, and he worked with Judge Draper, who was a longtime criminal court judge here in Nashville. And then in 1938, he and my mother got married, and then she got that job at Ward Belmont, and he and my grandfather started practicing together. And then my father practiced until, I mean, he actually had an active license until he died in 2004. So, and I practiced law with him from 1974 until, well, he went into a nursing home in 1998, I believe. No, 2001. And so I practiced law with him for all those years. And even then, when he was in the nursing home, we'd bring him over to the office. So he was, we were together for a long time in the office. So that's pretty much the story about my family.
Okay, you mentioned, that you also practiced with your two brothers at some point.
Oh yeah, my brothers. Yeah, I've had an older brother, Oscar B. Hofstetter III. He went to Father Ryan, just like I did. He went to Vanderbilt, got a degree in geology, and then he went to UT and got a master's in geology. Went up to Detroit and worked in geology up there. I think there was like a salt mine or something up there. I don't know. He didn't like that too much. So he came back here and he went to the Nashville School of Law, and he graduated from there in 1978, and he became the law clerk for Judge Shelton Luton. And Judge Luton retired in 1980, and so he came over in the firm with us. So at that point, it was my father and me, my older brother. My grandfather had passed away in 1975, so he and I were like ships passing in the night. He was actually a member of the firm, but he never came to the office because he was too sick to. So at that point, there were three of us, and then I had my next older brother, Robert. He's a musician. He went to Father Ryan. Then he went into the seminary at Coleman, Alabama. And he was there for a couple of years. And one of the people that was teaching there was a music teacher. And his name was Tom Spock. And Tom Spock went to Alabama, and my brother went to Alabama to study music at Alabama. And he won a Marshall Scholarship and a Fulbright Scholarship to study music in Copenhagen. And so he, in 1970, he went to Copenhagen, and he's been there ever since. And he ended up marrying this woman from Kansas who won a Marshall Scholarship in goldsmithing. She was a jeweler, and they have a daughter named Elizabeth, my goddaughter, and they've since divorced. And he was my brother was the organist to the Queen in Denmark, and she had a summer castle, and he would go out to the summer castle and every week and play concerts out there. And when Chris and I, my youngest brother, went to Copenhagen for my niece's wedding, my brother Robert took us to the castle, and he played the organ. My wife was there, and my cousin Gail was there, and Chris and I pumped the organ. So it was really a lot of fun, and so we had a good visit there. And then so he's been in Copenhagen ever since 1970. And then my youngest brother, Chris, he went to Father Ryan, just like I did. He went to Vanderbilt. Then he took a couple of years off, and he worked for this vending company, Mark Morell's vending company. And then he went to the Nashville School of Law. I think he graduated in maybe 1982. And then he went to work for the U.S. District Court here in Middle District, Tennessee, for a retired, I guess, a senior judge. I don't know if I can't remember the name of the judge. Oh, it's the same name as the weather kid, and from Channel 5 that was supposed to be the head and then left. And I can't remember. That was the grandson, and the son was in the music business here. And I'm trying to think what his name was. I can't think of what his name was. But anyway, Chris clerked for him for a year, and then he came over to the firm in 1983, and then he practiced law with me on through the time that I left at the end of 2011, and then when I moved my practice to my house. We continued to have use the Hofstetter name, but we were, instead of being a partnership, it was an association at that time.
And is Chris still active in the legal field?
Yeah, he's got a part-time practice, and then they call them judicial commissioners. He's sort of at an intermediate level. He's not a full-time commissioner, and he's not a part-time commissioner. They have sort of like a shift commissioner or something that's in between, and he works about 30 hours a week, and he works all hours of the day. I mean, it's a pretty terrible schedule, I think, but
So one of those the night court judges, one of those night court things.
Yeah, it's like a night court. But he's assigned
it's 24 hours a day, so they work 3 shifts.
Right.
Little Hosapple does that, doesn't he?
Yeah, well, see, Chris works with a little Hosapple. I think Hosapple maybe works 8-hour shifts, and Chris works 6-hour shifts with him.
Yes, I looked at that one time way back, and working from 11 to 7 did not appeal to me at all.
No,
I did it one time. I did it one night. They said I tried that, and you had to work all 3 shifts. I didn't mind 7 to whatever, 7 to 3. I didn't mind 3 to 11, but 11 to 7. I said, this is not for me.
I can understand that. When I was when I was in college, I used to work at Kroger some, and a couple of summers I worked the night shift, and we'd unload the trucks and mop the floors and all that stuff, and have to redo the prices and all that. And man, one summer I was able to sleep okay, but one summer I couldn't, and it was really hard to be, to go through the day, and you're just, you're so tired, and you at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock you start to work. Oh man, that's just awful.
And as long as you brought, which Kroger was that?
I worked at Kroger in Green Hills. I started there when I was a junior in high school, and worked all the way through like maybe the spring of my junior year, and then that summer, and then all my senior year before I started Vanderbilt. And that was at the Green Hills Kroger. And then I worked when I started Vanderbilt. I didn't work there in school, and maybe I worked. I think when I with Vanderbilt, the first after my freshman and sophomore years, I think I worked at Green Hills, and that's when I did the night stocking. And then my junior year, I couldn't get a job at Green Hills, so I went to work at the store there at Blair, which is where your Army Navy surplus store was for so many years. But that's where the store was before Freedman's Army Navy was.
You mentioned Andrew Benedict's father, I believe.
Yes.
The Masonic Lodge built that building in 1952, and they had a lease with Kroger, and they went to Mr. Benedict, and Mr. Benedict, being a big Mason, and B, knowing that Kroger would pay their rent every month for 20 years, said, I will be glad to loan you the money for this building. My father rented that building. We were in that building within 6 months of the day Kroger left, if not 3 days later or a month later, and stayed in that building till June of this year when we did close the building. But yeah, it was a good spot, a good neighborhood. I imagine, and I remember when we took over and people were coming in. My father used the old Kroger sign and just blacked it out with marker, and people would come in with one day somebody came in with some bottles, wanted their 3 cents for the bottles,
Yeah.
and not a grocery store, not a grocery store.
Well, I sort of had my eyes open when I got over there because I was used to dealing with people over in Green Hills, and I was a checker. I worked everything. I didn't work meat, but I worked in the produce department. I worked all over that store, and of course I would check people out. And when went over to the store at Blair, I was still continued to check people out, and they showed up with these things called food stamps. I didn't know what they were. I had to get an education about food stamps because you didn't have food stamps in Green Hills.
That's right. That building's about 8,600 square feet, and it was built, and in today it was a Kroger superstore.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, one of those stores, that parking lot, of course, it's not flat. And sometimes we take the groceries out for the people, and that cart would sit there, and sometimes those carts would start rolling,
yeah.
and and one of them roll out in the middle of Hillsborough Road. I thought, oh man, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. It's going to be in a car coming across, but I managed to rescue it before it got hit.
Yeah. You mentioned George Cate.
Yes.
And yeah, I know later on you practiced law with Mr. Cate and know his kids.
Lucille Cate was George's older sister.
His older sister. Okay.
Yeah.
But tell Mr. Cate was around for a lot of years, and he was influential in Metro government, etc. What was it like knowing him, and what kind of man was he, and all that?
He taught me a lot about how to. Hey, you could never get Mr. Cate flustered. It didn't matter how nasty people were with him. He didn't get flustered. And I remember, these people would call him up and hound him about taking subscriptions and all these things. And he'd say, well, I don't think I need to have that today, but thank you for the opportunity. I mean, he'd always speak to people in a way that made them feel good about themselves, even though they weren't going to get anything. But he was he was a consummate gentleman. I didn't know him when he was, I guess as a younger man, he probably was a more aggressive lawyer. I'm sure he was still a gentleman, but I bet he wasn't as willing to compromise because he was involved pretty heavily with Beverly Briley when that split came up and they started Metro government, and that was very contentious because Ben West. The Ben West building here in Nashville. Ben West was the mayor, had been mayor for a long time, and he was dead set on not having a Metro consolidated, and so they had that vote, and Mr. Cate was very instrumental in getting that thing passed. So and matter of fact, he would speak all over the country about consolidated government. He was an expert on that. So I mean. And he was a general in the Guard, and he was what, vice mayor of Nashville.
He was the first vice mayor of Nashville,
and he was something. And I really enjoyed being around him. It was just a real pleasure. And we moved. Our offices were. I take you through the history of the office. But anyway, we moved in with Mr. Cate in, I think, 2003. Let me take that back. In 1998, we left the Metropolitan Federal Building. We'd been there from 1975 to 1998. In 1998, we moved over to the Cavalier Building. And that's my dad was still, he was coming to the office. He was being picked up. He wasn't in the nursing home yet, but he really wasn't capable of doing anything. And so there was my brother Chris, my brother Oscar, and me, and my dad, and we were on the third floor. And Mr. Cate was on the fifth floor with John Setzer. And I don't know if you know, John Setzer died in a bombing I don't know, when we were up there with him, with Mr. Cate. But let's see, maybe about 2005. I think about 2005, John Setzer decided he was going to move out of the office, and Mr. Cate was looking for somebody, and so he put something up on the on the building about sharing office space, and so we went up there, and I thought Mr. Cate was retiring, and it was talking about Setzer, and I knew my dad was going to be out of the office, and so we were looking to lessen our space. And so we just wanted to talk to him. And I found out Mr. Cate was staying and John Setzer was leaving. I said, oh, that's even better. And so we passed the acid test, and Mr. Cate decided to accept us. And so we moved up on the 5th floor of Mr. Cate. And I guess about 2005. And so I was with him from about 2005 until 2011. And I enjoyed it all the time. But I remember when we first got in, he said, I'm here 5 days a week. They said, but I just don't come in I don't come in the weekends. And I said, okay. So I work 7 days a week. So, but as soon as I started coming up there, he was coming up there on the weekends. He didn't really come up on Sundays, but he was up there almost every Saturday. And so he and I sit there and talk, and when we weren't working, and it was just really a lot of fun. And no, it was a real tribute, a real pleasure for me to be around him so much.
He was a good man, very interesting man. I always enjoyed his company. I always had something. Whenever you were with him, you could always take something away from the conversation. Right. That would.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, he had a way with people. He would, if you told him something that he knew, he wouldn't say, yeah, I know about that. He'd go, you're right. I mean, he wanted to make you seem like the star, not like he knew anything. He just had a way with people that was unique.
Yeah, he did. Let's back up a second. You mentioned your father went to Ryan, as did all of your brothers.
Right.
I believe you were born in East Nashville originally.
You're right.
And where did you go to elementary school?
I went to Christ the King on Belmont Boulevard.
So you had moved by then?
Yeah, I think we moved about, it was 1950 or 1951. I don't know. They had a bad snow in Nashville.
Blizzard of 50. I was born in 1950. I think it was the blizzard of 51. I think.
Yeah, right around that time, I think is when we moved.
Yeah, there was a bad blizzard of 51. I was born in September, so it had to be the blizzard of 51.
Yeah, so that's we moved around that time. I don't know whether it was 51 or 50.
So you were very young.
Yeah, I didn't. I have no.
You have no recollection of East Nashville.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, I there was a guy down the street that my parents stayed in touch with that I knew from there, but I didn't remember him from there.
Yeah. You told me you told me an interesting story. Shows how Nashville used to work when St. Henry's Elementary was built.
Oh yeah.
You said the diocese decided they were going to send some of you Christ the King boys over there.
Yeah, well, that was in 1957. And I guess I would have been about the 3rd grade, and my brother Robert, he was 4 years older. He would have been about the 7th grade, and so at that time, most of the people who went to Christ the King lived right around the school, and there weren't that many of us that lived out in Green Hills or away from the Belmont area, and so they were trying to find people that they could assign to St. Henry, so they'd have a good, set of people to be going there. So they decided they're going to assign my brother Robert and me to St. Henry. So I guess we got a letter, and my dad called up the bishop, and he said, yes, I got this thing. Said, but that's not really going to work, because that's not on my way to work in the morning. So they'll be going to Christ. So the bishop just gave in.
That's back then you could do that.
Yeah, right? Well, he did some work for the diocese. It wasn't like he called him up out of the blue. The bishop didn't know who he was. He knew who he was. And my dad had been in the legislature too, so,
And I believe didn't you have an aunt that was a nun
two.
too?
Yeah, one, Sister Adrian Marie was the older one of the two. She was quite liberal. She was on the opposite end from my father. And she was active in a lot of different um, uh, sit-ins and things like that. It's a really funny story about her being in the sit-in, but she marched with Martin Luther King. And some of these nuclear facilities, she'd get arrested there, when people were doing things. And one time they had some sort of a sit-in at the mayor's office in Memphis. And she was involved in the sit-in, and apparently the story came into the Nashville paper. And so the uh, uh, my dad called my other aunt that was a nun. He said, "What's your sister doing down there in Memphis?" He said, "What do you mean?" Said, I think she's in there holed up with the mayor." Said, having to sit in the mayor's office and with some clown. And so she said, "Well, how do you know it's my sister?" And she said, "He said it was Sister Adrian Marie." She said, "Well, we're Dominican sisters. There are a lot of Sister Adrian Maries." And there, my dad said, "Sister Adrian Marie Hofstetter, how many of those you got?" So she had to fess up. She was one of them. But yeah, she got arrested a number of times, but she was a very big activist, and of course everybody in the civil rights movement knew her. And that story about the mayor's office was in a book that this woman wrote not too long ago about Sister Ava Marie. So, and the other nun was Sister Martin Marie, and she was the president of St. Catherine College in I guess it's St. Catherine, Kentucky. And she was up there until she died. Both of them were assigned to St. Catherine's up there.
Okay. Um, what was it like? You probably said you grew up in a legal family. What was that like? Is that what drew you to the law? Or were there other factors?
I suppose I don't know that I really considered anything else. I remember when I was I guess I was in the seventh grade. We were talking about being lawyers and doing this and doing that, and uh, I had a good friend, Will Lancaster, that lived down the street, and he and I talked about being lawyers. And his father, Will, his father was Dr. Philolog that used to do the shows on WSM. It was Maxwell Lancaster. He was a professor at Vanderbilt, and he went to Father Ryan, and he was a year behind me at Christ the King. Heck of an athlete and really good student, really smart. And ended up being the president of the student body at Father Ryan. But I can remember when we were in seventh grade, we'd talk about being lawyers, and so I guess that I really never considered much of anything else. So that was just what I did. My grandfather did it. My father did it. And
As your brothers seem to take a little bit more indirect path.
I guess they didn't seem to be as,
So,
but it was an easy thing to do. There was a job there waiting for them. They didn't have to work to get the job. They just had to go, just graduate. So.
well, be honest, I could sort of tell the same story. Yes, I went to law school and I practiced law and enjoyed it immensely. But I knew that sooner or later I'd end up running. I'd end up running the family Army Navy store, which sooner or later came to pass. So
Yeah.
I guess if it's your destiny, it's your destiny.
Yeah,
Did you hang out at the office when you were younger?
No, I didn't really hang out, but I remember going up there, when we were kids, of course, back then you'd have to worry about people snatching your children off the street and all that stuff. And, we lived out in Green Hills, and my brother Bob and my brother Bus and I we'd catch the bus out in Green Hills, and we'd go down the bus downtown, maybe go to a movie, there's a place called Hooberry's. Hooberry had so you had coins and stuff that you could buy, and just little stores downtown that we would go to, and we go to, then we'd stop off my dad's office, and he and my uncle and my grandfather were all in there, and we'd wait to see him, and then we'd catch the bus and go home. So we were around. I knew where his office was all the time, but
Where was the office at that time?
well, he was at the American Trust, but he had
Okay.
several offices. A couple, it seemed like a couple of times on New Year's Eve. It seemed like Christmas Eve, things always happened. And they had a fire in the Exchange Building when he was there. And that was on Church Street, I believe.
Yeah. Church Street. Yeah.
And I think Jake Doyle had his files. Jake Doyle was in that office, and they said that there are a lot of debtors mighty happy when Jake Doyle's files all burned up. But then I think there was another office that he was in that I think had some other issues, on Christmas Eve. Then we had a dog that died. My favorite dog, my first dog, Major, died on Christmas Eve. Got hit by a car. We had one of Chris's dogs got hit on Christmas Eve by a dog. Anyway. But after the Exchange Building, I believe he moved to the American Trust Building, and that's we were there until 1975. Of course, I graduated from Vanderbilt Law School in 1974, passed the bar exam, and then maybe in April of 75, we moved into the what was then the Home Federal Tower. Then it became the Metropolitan Federal Building. It's at 230 4th Avenue North, across from the arcade. And I think now it's a Bobby Hotel.
Correct.
Okay, and
that's down the street from my father's first store, was next to George's Hatters. And that was my father's first store. He opened took over that store in 1949.
a good year. That's your
Ran it from people used to say when I was getting engaged and he came to meet people in Memphis, people would say, "Oh, you're Frank's father." And he'd say, "It used to be Frank was my son." He said, "I had a business before he was born." So, in fact, when he said I was 25 at the time, he said, I had a business and a child when I was his age. So let me ask you, so the first I remember was, like I said, the Home Federal, later on the Met Fed building. So, I first met you in probably 73 or 74. I was 73. I was working for Alan Russell in the General
What
Sessions.
about 72? Were you working with him?
No, I didn't get out of college till 72. I was working early 73, but you were probably still in law school.
Okay, well, no, yeah. I knew that I was in the clerk's office, and you and I and Philip Robinson will go to lunch all the time, and that's I know you'd been at NBA with Philip, and I knew Philip from the summer before because I'd worked in the circuit court clerk's office.
Right.
And for George Rooker, he was the circuit court clerk, so he was your boss at General Sessions. Yeah. Even though Alan Russell was the office manager or whatever you want to call it.
Carter Howard was there, and Margaret, and
Velma Short.
Velma Short and Irene Dady. I remember Irene, she said to me one time, she said, "Next Friday, we're going out to Old Hickory to have court." I said, "Who's the judge?" She says, "I am." I said, "Okay." We went out to Old Hickory, we had the docket, and they used to have General Sessions, once a month, used to send somebody out to Old Hickory.
Yeah, well, after I became a lawyer, we go over to, like on Friday night or something, we went to the Continental Hotel, and Irene was there and Philip was there, and
Yeah.
we called it some kind of legal seminar, like
Yeah.
it sounded like it was business, but it was just.
Yeah, that wasn't
just
that
a
the
bunch of
hotel,
fun.
wasn't that the hotel across the river, the king, became king of the road or something?
It's where,
I know.
since, where, not Stan Siddiqui, Garfinkel, Dan Garfinkel used to have his parties with
Yeah.
all, he'd have a Christmas party and he represented a lot of brothels, so he had a lot of his clientele there.
You know, talking about Dan Garfinkel, I remember Dan, I asked him one time, I said, Mr. Garfinkel, how do you know how much to charge a client? He says, well, after he tells you the story, then you figure out it's gonna be this and that and the other, you make it come up with a number. You say, I want X dollars, and I only got so much, and you take it, and then you take him by his heels and you hold him upside down, you shake him, if any other money falls out of his pocket, you get that, and rest, you work out the rest later. So if you really don't want the case, give them a really stupid number, and if they give it to you, it's worth it.
Okay.
But then I said, well, what's the last thing you tell a client before you walk into the courtroom? He turns to me and says, you brought your toothbrush with you, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan had the matching shoe. Dan had like 30 pair of the matching shoes and the pastels. He was quite a character.
And
And,
the medallion, and he was.
and then the medallion and
Yeah.
all that. Yes, those were. Can you think of any of those other, when we were young lawyers, any of those other lawyers that were characters, so to speak?
Well, according to Enix, he was a really hilarious black fellow, and he'd come into court and he'd always have something funny to say, and I think he'd do things to sort of get. Judge Shelton Luton was a longtime probate judge that my brother worked for, and Corness would say things to irritate him, I think, but they sort of got along, but he was just sort of trying to get on his nerves. But Corness was he was interesting. But he was talking about one day, he said he came in there and he was having problems with his order, because he said he had his order out and he was going across the parking lot and dropped it and it fell into a puddle of water. So he had some kind of soggy order. He said, Judge Luton said, man, I said, Mr. Enix said, I thought you would be holding that thing up really high. I said, if you're going to try to get some money out of me.
Yes, those were. Then there was like Mr. Rutherford, Dave Rutherford.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember one time Dave Rutherford he was always very kind to all the people that worked in the courthouse, and there was one elevator operator named Georgia. I know you remember. Not yeah, you remember Ed too.
Yeah.
But Georgia's in there, and I think Georgia wanted to Dave to co-sign for a car or something, or co-sign a note of some sort. And so she was looking for Dave. She knew he was in the courthouse. And one time she came up, I think we were on the first floor. She came up, and I think Dave knew that was her elevator that was getting ready to open. So he got back in one of the recesses of one of the other elevators. He was sort of hiding back there, so he couldn't see it. And she comes out of that elevator and is looking like this. And there he is, kind of right next to her, and just hit back there. And she goes back, said, "Oh, she wanted me to sign a note for her." He's a funny guy.
Tangentially, I was sitting in Harry Lester's courtroom one day on motion day, and this young lawyer stands up from one of the big firms, and he moved to be dismissed as counsel. And Judge Lester said, "No problem." He said, "Just give us the order." And then he's turned to walk away, and Judge Lester said, "Son, what about that surety you signed?" And he looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" He said, "When you filed a lawsuit, yes, I'm surety for costs not to exceed whatever it was at the time." And he says, "Oh yeah, I guess." He says, so Judge Lester looks at him and said, "Son, you know what a surety is?" He said, "What's that, Judge?" And Judge Lester says, "A fool with a fountain pen."
Yeah.
My daddy told me one time, if don't co-sign the loan, if you're gonna co-sign it, just give them the money.
Yeah, that's right. I think that my wife learned that the hard way with her sons. You can't expect people want you to co-sign, don't expect them to
No,
pay. So,
exactly. Anyway, talk a little bit when you talk. Tell us about your practice of law. Um, what kind of cases you have? Anything memorable?
yeah, well, when I was in law school, I knew my dad had a lot of, he used to go to the estate planning council all the time. And I thought I was going to be doing a lot of estate work. And so I tried to learn a lot about wills and probate and all that stuff. And so then when I got into the firm, I learned I wasn't going to be doing any of that stuff. So I had to learn, I had to be a collection lawyer. He represented the corporations. I'd do the grunt work, and I'd go collect their debts and all that stuff. And when the, when the corporate executives got to drinking too much and they got arrested, I had to go to General Sessions criminal with them, and I had to do all that kind of work. So I had to learn how to do all that. And so I had a lot of little collection cases, and I'd go over there to General Sessions early on in my career, and I tried a lot of cases. I learned how to try cases, not through trial and error, and also by having to watch other people, because you didn't know where you're going to be on the docket when they call these cases, and so you'd have to sit there and watch other people try cases, and so you learned a lot about trying cases by doing that. And so I had a lot of those, a lot of collection cases, and I was doing little criminal cases and all that stuff to begin with. And I see all these. There were a lot of lawyers that would come in there. I tried to do it on Tuesday, so I didn't feel like I could party a little bit on the weekends, and I wouldn't go feel bad on Monday. So I wanted to. I knew I'd be okay on Tuesday, so Tuesdays when I went over there, Jake Doyle was always there. I'd roll into court about 10 minutes to 9, and he'd be sitting there, and he had this huge docket. And then Bob Ziegler was always he was in there. He always had a big docket, and so I learned a lot about doing that stuff during that time.
Mr. Lowenstein there?
Yeah, Herman Lowenstein. He always had a big docket, and then what was I'm trying to think about later on this Sam the fellow that got shot.
Yeah,
Sam
Schlanger.
Yeah.
And then Stelzner and Westbrooks used to have a huge.
Yeah, well, I don't think they came in there.
They came from Green Hill.
Yeah, but they didn't. Yeah, they weren't on the day that I came.
No.
I usually went in there on Tuesdays. I had all my cases on Tuesdays. And I remember one time, Barbara Haynes, she was doing a lot of that collection stuff, and I guess she graduated about probably 3 years maybe after I did, and so I remember at one point she said, "You and I are the king and queen of General Sessions Court," and I thought, no, that's one of these other guys. That's Jake Doyle. I mean, that's Bob Ziegler, not me. I said, but I appreciate that. I appreciate the sentiment, but that's just not true. And then I think it was about 1978. You and I and Kenny and my cousin Bill Hofstetter all went to the was the YMCA night.
Town YMCA.
And we went to this bankruptcy court, and that's when
Paul Jennings taught that class.
Paul Jennings taught the class, and he was the bankruptcy referee at the time, and they didn't call them judges. And this was under the Bankruptcy Act, and so after I took that course, that's when I started being a bankruptcy trustee, and I never got any really big cases. I just got some Chapter 7s, and I think we got paid $10 a case, to wrap them up, and so I did have something with Dr. Chickenia, and I think it was a preference case, and I maybe got a judgment against Dr. Chickenia. My cousin Bill and I tried it, and who was that was on the, I'm trying to think about who it was that was on the other side. I'll think of it in a minute anyway. He he kept telling Donna Craig, that was Keith London's court officer, said, "I'm steaming, so those Hofstetter boys really got me going." But they had some sort of a bill was, I was the trustee, Bill was my attorney, and pretty much the attorney that was, it was who practiced with Alan Mazer, what was
Alan Saturn.
Alan Saturn. It was Alan Saturn. Alan Saturn basically admitted to all the elements of a preference in the pretrial conference. And so there wasn't really much need for a trial even, but we got a judgment against Dr. Chickenilla, but I think that went on for a long time. I mean, I think about 1980, they passed the bankruptcy code. And that's when the U.S. Trustee's Office was created, I believe, that at that time. And so we weren't trustees anymore. But I still had at least that one case that was on the docket for at least another 8 years or something from the old Bankruptcy Act. And I'd go in there with Keith Lund and said, "When are you gonna get this thing over with?" I said, "As soon as I can." I said, "As soon as I can." But I learned a lot about bankruptcy practice in that time, and I tried some pretty good bankruptcy cases, and I didn't really have any. I had one case that was reported. It was Twinton Properties Partnership. It was a real estate case, and it dealt with this the statute that dealt with the paying taxes on property, that if you have basically defensive title to any property that you paid taxes on, real property taxes on, for 21 years. And so matter of fact, I tried a case, actually I lost in the Tennessee Supreme Court. It was involved cumulus property versus Shem. And I thought I had that case won on the same statute, because when they bought this property, they shifted the property description, and so they weren't paying taxes on the property that was in dispute. And it was a road that they were using to get up to the tower where they were having their broadcasts, and they basically took Mr. Shem's property by adverse possession. And the Supreme Court, incorrectly, I believe, ruled that that statute did not apply unless you were talking about an entire tract. Of course, there's nothing in the statute that said that. It's just something they came up with, and the judge that ruled in that case, that wrote the opinion, it was I think it was his first session on the court, and he'd come over from the criminal court. And during the preceding case, he said, "I'm still trying to get up to speed on civil cases." In my opinion, he never got up to speed on mine. But anyway, that was the ruling in that case. But probably the biggest case that I was involved in was Nicholstone Bookbindery versus Chelsea House Publishers. It was Nicholstone was our client, and they bound some books for these Chelsea House people, and we're out of New York, and the Chelsea House people wouldn't pay them, and so they sued them in Tennessee, and that was my dad was representing Nicholstone, and so he went over to the trial court, and Jim Sanders from Neal and Harwell was representing Chelsea House, and he filed a motion for summary judgment, claiming that they lack personal jurisdiction over him. And my dad had all this, had all these affidavits showing, where all these materials had come from that they used to bind his books, and everything was done in Tennessee. And they called in Tennessee, asked him to do all this work in Tennessee, and then Bob Brown, I guess based on that old Darby case, Darby Lumber case. It was probably Darby Lumber was probably when you went to law school. It was probably the authority in Tennessee on long arm jurisdiction, and so he just said no, he don't have jurisdiction over them, and so they granted summary judgment, and so then my dad appealed it, and I guess about the time they sent out notice of the argument. I don't know if can't remember if my dad wrote the brief or what, but anyway, whenever they scheduled the hearing, my dad was supposed to be in Hawaii with Andrews Distributing Company. That was another firm that we represented, and they would take all their distributors to these places every year, and all the air conditioning contractors that bought from them, and my dad was also, he was on the board, so he got taken. He and my mother were taken, and hell, they'd go every year. They go to Australia, they go to Europe, or they go to someplace like Hawaii. But anyway, this year that particular year they're going to Hawaii. Dad said, "Well, you got to go up there and argue this case." So I said, "Okay, well, I'll go up there and argue." So I started looking at it, and one of the things that looks strange to me is that there was it had gone off as a judgment on personal jurisdiction. Yet he got a summary judgment. That's summary judgment is that's on the merits, and personal jurisdiction is not on the merits. That there was some was awry, and so that was one thing that I complained about in the Court of Appeals. Now I don't remember if I wrote the original brief or I wrote a reply brief, but I wrote something about that. And then, of course, we attacked that jurisdiction, said, that this is not right. And because, they called in Tennessee, wanted all this work done, and then all the work was done in Tennessee, and yet they don't feel like they have to go to court in Tennessee. And so when I went to the Court of Appeals, I think Judge Shriver, who was he'd been I think judge in First Circuit at one time, and then he moved up the Court of Appeals he was Tom Shriver's father. He was Tom Shriver Sr. Tom Shriver Jr. was the longtime DA here in Nashville. Judge Shriver was on the court, and I know Judge Todd was on the court.
Henry Todd.
Yeah, Henry Todd, and I think that I can't remember who the third one was, Pereira or something. I can't remember who that third one was, but anyway, they ruled against me, and so I filed a petition for certiorari, because that's what you did back then. They didn't have the rules of appellate procedure. They hadn't been enacted at that time, so we filed a petition for certiorari, and I don't know I don't know how many cases that you've had, but if once you file an application for certiorari or application for permission to appeal, it's the Supreme Court. You don't expect to hear anything for at least 6 months. Well, we got something back in about 3 weeks. So granted, we want to hear this case. So what I didn't know was in the Darby case, the trial judge that had been reversed, the trial judge who had ruled that there was jurisdiction in Darby, was Judge Brock, who was on the Supreme Court. The case got appealed to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals affirmed Judge Brock. And the Court of Appeals judge who wrote that opinion was Judge Cooper, who was also on the Supreme Court at that time. So I had two judges that were sitting there spring-loaded to reverse that, because when the case Darby went up Supreme Court, they reversed them both, and so they were spring-loaded to reverse that Darby decision. And so when I got up there, we eventually won, and there was a lawyer out of Knoxville. His name was Don Payne, and Don Payne had seminars, annual seminars in Tennessee for, I don't know, 30 or more years.
He's the evidence guy. Taught at UT, didn't he?
He taught at UT, but he was head of the Tennessee Rules Commission, and he would have these annual seminars, and I think it was in 1980, he said that the Nicholstone case was the case of the year in Tennessee. So that was a cool case, and eventually that Chelsea House hired some lawyer out of the DC area to file for certiorari in the U.S. Court, the Supreme Court, and he filed his petition, and I didn't know anything about that. And of course, I wasn't. I was not licensed in the U.S. Supreme Court at that time. My father was, though. So my brother Oscar and I sort of wrote up a brief, and you had to put them in these little booklets, and we got Nicholstone to bind the booklets for us, and then we sent our response in. And I don't know, it was a while before we got the answer, but anyway, they denied certiorari in that case. But what was so interesting was that there were three of them, three justices dissented from the denial of certiorari, denial of the grant of certiorari, and wrote a dissenting opinion. So I got an opinion out of the U.S. Supreme Court about that case. Anyway, that was probably the biggest case that I ever had.
You mentioned Judge Todd. I remember when I was, I guess, in high school, he was a circuit court judge, and my father got called for jury duty. My father loved being on jury duty, and he would go back, and he said during the recess, he would go back, and Judge Todd would say, "Harry, I got this great case coming up. You're gonna love this case." And yeah. Back in the old days.
Yeah, well, I can tell you a lot of stories about Judge Todd, but I don't think that most of these stories I couldn't tell on video like this. But then I did hear that Judge Todd started off as a General Sessions Court, General Sessions judge, and I don't know how he. I'd have no idea how he got that position, but anyway, the lawyers would always come to Judge Todd and want him, want some help on some traffic tickets. And he wouldn't help them at all. So they all got together and they said, we think you need a position on the circuit court. So they got him moved up to circuit court so they could find somebody they could work with.
Way back, I had a manila envelope filled with traffic tickets, and my father, to my father's, whatever. Now, when my father said, "Take these and go find Judge Robinson, the big Gail Robinson." So back then, the Ben West building was, it was fairly new, and they had that lounge where the judges hung out. And I had this envelope, and I walked in, and Judge Robinson was sitting there holding court with all the people. "How you doing, Judge?" "Fine, Frank. How you?" Da, 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 da. I had a nice conversation. He said, "How's your dad?" I said, "Dad's fine." I said, "Matter of fact, Judge, he asked me to hand you this envelope, bring you this envelope." And Judge felt his head. And he said, "Frank, tell your dad next time he has tickets he needs taken care of, he could bring them down himself."
That sounds like big Gail.
It's like when Earl Hawkins was criminal court clerk. He really didn't do anything that hurt people. He just sort of skirted on the edge. And back then, nobody worried about it. This was a different town.
Yeah.
If you were in the club, so to speak, if you were a native or in the club, you got along pretty well. You weren't hurting people. You were just kind of taking care of you and your friends.
Sort of like Fate.
Like Fate Thomas,
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Throughout your practice of law, you practiced for how many years? Since 74, 75?
Well, 74, I was actively practicing until the end of March of 2019.
Yeah. Can you think of any other of the older lawyers that you particularly remember that were an influence on you? That anything?
Yeah, I'd say as far as being an influence on me, the one lawyer I'd pick out would be Jack Robinson Sr. my dad would be gone a lot, and I told him about how he'd go on these trips and stuff with Andrews and all that. And you know, these clients would call me up and you know, hell, I was just a young lawyer. I didn't know the answers to some of these questions. So I'd have to go down and talk to Jack Robinson. And you know, one time I got sent off. I had to close we were representing an automobile dealership, and they had a dealership down in Memphis, and I was working on the contract deal with I had selling this auto dealership, and the same people had sold another dealership to Beeman. And that's all I had to go on. I had that file, and I looked at those contracts to see kind of what they had and all that, but I didn't know much about it. So I had to go down and talk to Jack Robinson several times about what, you know, what the deal was about these contracts and what the implications of some of this language was. And he was really good, but he also taught me a lot about how to evaluate a lawsuit. And you know, we would you could read a complaint, and you start reading through it, and it starts to you know, boggle your mind about all these things that are in there, and you know, you start thinking about how I'm going to deal with this. And you know, he taught me about trying to take it one piece at a time, and instead of trying to deal with the whole lawsuit and get yourself caught up in that, just take each particular piece and try to work it out in your mind how to deal with each particular aspect of the case. And you'll finally get to where you can deal with the whole thing. But I mean, he taught me how to break things down in a way that that you could actually evaluate a lawsuit that was coming in and prepare to respond. So I mean, he was really good at that.
Okay. You went to law school at Vanderbilt.
Yep.
Were there any professors there that you found particularly interesting, or?
Well, there was, of course, Professor Hartman. He was like that guy that was in the what was it? I can't remember. Yeah, that movie, and he was sort of like him, and he was uh, he was rough around the edges, and he would say funny things, and he'd talk about how, you know, if you come in unprepared, said you're not going to be able to go to my party. You're not going to have a keg party. So anybody comes in unprepared, we're not having a keg party this year. And he was a character, and uh, but he was interesting because we would, on every Friday afternoon, we would have a beer in Blackacre. That was a little area in the middle of the law school, and they bring these kegs in, and they would, sometimes they'd have guests come in. One time they had Heaven Lee come in. She was a dancer down at the Black Poodle, I think.
Black Poodle, Friends Alley.
Yeah, and she came in a limo and goes in there, and then next thing you know, Hartman's up there talking to Heaven Lee. I guess he was getting the lowdown on her. So he was interesting, and then of course a couple of professors were on the restatement. You know, John Wade was the dean of the law school when I first started, and he was part of the one of the people on the restatement of torts. And then this Professor Leffler that came over for the last year that I was there, he was on the restatement of torts, and they're very good professors. And then we had, of course, my last year on Tennessee trial practice, and William Harbison, who later became Judge Harbison on the Supreme Court, taught that class, and it was a really good class, and I had a lot of fun with it. And we had our mock trial with him, and he was he was just a fine person.
Any notable law school classmates?
Well, there's the people that people might recognize. There's Ed Dobbs. He was out of Atlanta. He's written a couple of horn books on bankruptcy. Who else? John Ryder, out of Memphis. He was the general counsel for the Republican Party for many years. John McCullough was a federal district judge out of Memphis, the Western District. Let me see who else. Jim Martin he was number one in our class, but he didn't go like a lot of these people go up to New York. He stayed here and was a circuit court judge in Williamson County. He practiced with Charlie Warfield and what's it, Ferris Warfield and Kennedy.
He was a domestic guy,
Yeah,
wasn't
he
he?
did domestic relations
They
lawyer.
used to say you've been Martinized.
Yeah. And he did a lot of that work, and then I guess he moved to Franklin and he became a judge. And I saw him. This is the first time I'd seen him in a number of years. Last month that we had our 50th law school reunion. He was there. And, I talked to him for a little while. He seems to be getting along all right. I think he's doing some mediating now. And let me think who else. There were several of our guys that went to practice with Bass, Berry and Sims, and it was very interesting at that time. We were in the this was 1974, and we were in the American Trust Building. But I think Bass Berry was in there, and Bo Cummings was in there, and there's several law firms in that building, just in that little American. But I think when there were, I think, three guys, Jay Bowen and Lee Barfield and Mike Peake, went to work at Bass Berry, and I think that meant 16 lawyers. I don't know how many lawyers they got now, 400 or something. But I think it was 16.
Different world
Yeah.
now. He's 16, 20 lawyers, and you were the biggest firm in town.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. Bo Cummings was tiny too, and I guess what there's something. I can't remember, something Bolt now that they merged with some of those big firms. And while it lasted, they merged with somebody, didn't they?
Waller Lansing recently merged with somebody.
Yeah, so those were I guess the biggest firms. And I don't think Gullett Sanford that they didn't merge with anybody. I think they're still separate.
But back then there were a lot of. My recollection is back then there were firms, there were big firms, medium firms. There are a lot of people, firms like you and your father or myself, or at the time Philip Robinson was practicing before he became judge. There's a lot of solo practitioners back then, I seem to recall.
Yeah, they sure were. And,
and everybody didn't run to be in firms.
Yeah, well, I mean, you didn't have to specialize. I mean, everybody did everything. And of course, everybody at that time, this bar was small enough. Everybody knew everybody, and so I was at that meeting last night. They kept talking about collegiality, and I kept thinking, they don't have any idea what collegiality is. I mean, collegiality is what we had when we first started. When everybody would see everybody on the street, that everybody was, handshake meant something, and somebody tell you they're going to do something, they do it. I mean. Now you don't ever see these people that they're faceless, and the lawyers will abuse them, and they'll tell them they're going to do one thing and then do something exactly the opposite. And it's a jungle out there now. But
they used to say if Dave Rutherford called you up in the middle of the day in July and told you it was pitch black outside, you wouldn't have to look. You could take everything you owned and you could bet that it was pitch black outside.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, back then, heard stories. Like Dan Garfinkel and Bill Wilson. They said they have a case. They'd be out the night before I call up the opposing attorney. Man, I was out late last night. I just can't do it. Let's put this off another month. Yeah, no problem. There was true. Yeah, We used to go out to lunch every day, or to certain places. Go to Langford's on Fridays. Go to no, excuse me, went to Satsuma on Fridays for the gumbo.
Yeah, okay, gumbo. We go to Langford's. I went every day. They had fried chicken.
Had the roasted chicken at
Yeah,
Langford's.
yeah.
It was just everybody got together. If you were in a courtroom and you were on the other side, great. We'd fight
Yeah.
tooth and nail. But when you walked out of the courtroom, it was let's go get a drink, let's have lunch, let's how's the wife and family.
Yeah, well, everybody got along, and I'm sure there were probably some hard feelings, but I mean, nobody would take advantage of the other person because of how close the bar was at that time.
No,
And yeah, but as we got bigger and this, as they start talking about what are these new rules? Well, and, the rules of civil procedure were passed about 1974. I think they're by that court that Harbison was on, and Bill Phones and Brock that I spoke about, and Cooper and Joe Henry. That was the original court. They had to go around. The guy all got elected, and I think it was in 1974. And I think they passed maybe those rules. I think those rules of civil procedure, they passed them at that time, or maybe they
somewhere around there.
Yeah, and of course they were basically they were the same rules that they were using in the federal district court. So we learned something about them and law school. But I'm thinking, maybe they were already in effect before then. It seemed like that when I took that course with Harbison that we talked about that, because we had a course about Tennessee practice. But at any rate, when I got to practicing, the older lawyers would talk about the new rules and all that stuff. I don't know. We probably got into the 1980s, and they're still talking about the new rules. But the new rules led to all that discovery and all the abuse that started I think the collegiality on the downward path. That people just try to paper you to death, and it became not as much fun to practice law.
Well, along those lines, I was talking to somebody the other day. Now, the personal injury firm is very prevalent, and they advertise and so on. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing, but I seem to recall when we practiced, back when we used to practice law, the insurance companies were pretty reasonable on the front end. That they kind of created their own problem. Somebody decided, hey, we could hold on to all this money and invest it and make it, does that kind of ring a bell to you? That things for the insurance companies are just easier to deal with.
Well, I don't know. I guess I didn't do enough of that work to. Occasionally I'd get some of that stuff, but I didn't really do enough of that work to really have much of an opinion about whether they were easier or harder. I mean, a personal injury. I didn't do those cases. Auto accidents, I hardly ever had any of those. Most of the cases that I have were contract type cases, and or these minor criminal things that I did for a while until they started sending all those cases up to the criminal court. Then I wouldn't do them anymore because I didn't know the rules of criminal procedure.
As I recall, you were quite the master of the rules.
I worked on the rules.
Which at the end of the day, at the end of the day, if you know the rules, you can maneuver yourself very well in a courtroom.
Yeah, it helps to know the rules. I went to a number of seminars. I know I've mentioned Don Payne before, but somewhere around I don't know, about 1980 or so, he started having semi-annual seminars on the rules of civil procedure, and so uh, he started with rule number 1 and went up through maybe rule number 8, and then the next time he went from 9 to 16 or 19 or something, and then it took about 3 or 4 years, and he went through every one of the rules. and, all the important cases and all that stuff. And he talked about how you can use the rules, in your practice to get a little leverage. He was, he was a pretty good manipulator with the rules. I mean, of course, he was the chairman of the Rules Commission in Tennessee, so.
If you knew the rules, you could make the rules work to your advantage, because the
exactly.
vast majority of lawyers maybe had a working knowledge of the rules, but did not know them in depth.
I would say that's true, unless they dealt with them, but specifically, they probably didn't. They probably had some idea about, well, Rule 16 is about this, but they didn't really know what Rule 16 said, and unless they had a case on it. And sometimes I'd have a case on something that they didn't know anything about, and I might not have had a case on it either, but I had Don Payne and I had his notes, and so I knew how to use it. And so it was very helpful.
Okay. Now you mentioned, your life on Nashville. You mentioned you went to Father Ryan at 7th Vanderbilt. What, over the course of your adult career, have you been involved in terms of community activities,
Okay.
public service organizations? I know you're very active I know you and a group of guys are very active at Ryan.
Yeah, we were. Well, at one time, I sort of take you through it. After I passed the bar exam, I don't know how it came up, but my dad said, now, the first thing you want to do once you pass the bar exam is you want to join the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And I said, well, yeah, okay, what's that? So he said, well, it's just a group of people that go out and they do community work, and you'll get to know a lot of people in Nashville that they're up and coming people. So I said, okay. So you go down to their office down there on 4th Avenue, and it's a little office inside the Chamber of Commerce building, where it's right next to the L&C Tower. And you'll go talk to Velma Littlejohn. She's a friend of Eunice Miller's, who was my dad's secretary.
Yes.
And so said, and she'll tell you what you need to do. So I go down there and I talk to her, and so I start. She said, now, in order to go to the meeting, you got to get one of the members to invite you to go to the meeting. I said, okay. So she gave me a copy of the roster, and I started looking through it, and I said, oh yeah, there's Lynn Davis. I know Lynn Davis. He works at First American. He's a member, and he went to Father Ryan with me. So I called up Lynn Davis, and I said, hey, Lynn, would you mind taking me to this meeting of the Junior Chambers? That was in October of 1974, right after I passed the bar. And but before I got admitted to the Supreme Court of Tennessee. Anyway, he took me to the meeting, and so I joined, and then I started doing work in it. I think the first thing, I didn't work the Clinic Bowl that year. That was in 1974, because Father Ryan was in. They had Mike Wright, and that was the year Father Ryan won the state championship in football, and so Father Ryan was playing in the Clinic Bowl. Now that it was important to me to see that game, and I wouldn't go get stuck up in the stands selling Coca-Colas when Father Ryan was playing, so I didn't do that. But the next year I went to the first thing I can remember doing was Action Auction, and that was an online auction for the benefit of Channel 8, which is WDCN TV at the time. It's now WNPT, Channel 8, and I did that I worked there for about 19 years at the auction for the Junior Chamber up until 1984. Then I was just doing it for the station. I worked in staging for a couple of years. When as a stager, they had various boards, and you take the merchandise out and they'd auction them off. And so in staging, you would take the merchandise off and put the new merchandise on. And I worked on that, and I noticed that up above the floor, there were two people up there working, and I figured, they had something. It must be big shots at the at the auction. And then one of the two people was Jenny Wynn. And I knew Jenny Wynn because she was the wife of Bob Wynn, who was an executive at Kusan. And my dad represented Kusan, and I did some stuff for Kusan too. And so I knew Jenny, and so about 1979, WDCN decided they wanted to have a production volunteer program. And so I was one of the first people that started doing the production volunteer people at volunteering at Channel 8. We would run the cameras and run the teleprompter and run the chyron and all that. And then I would go with the crew, and we'd go. They had a high school football game of the week. I did that for a couple of years, and then I took Jenny retired from working up in what I call the crow's nest, and I worked with the producer at the auction for about 13, 14 years. Every auction, and I think until the auction was no more, but they ended up giving me a gavel award for my work for the auction. And then in the Judy Chamber, I was involved in most of the activities. I think at one time I was the chair of their Italian Street Fair, which was a big event for, I think it's the Nashville Symphony. And Tootie Bradford, Jimmy Bradford's wife, was the chair of, I guess, the Italian Street Fair chair for the whole event. It was a big event over at Vanderbilt.
Was that back when the street fair was underneath the stadium, or was it when it was out? When
it was
they
out.
moved it outside to where all those buildings are now?
No, this was when it was over in Vanderbilt, off Natchez Trace.
Yeah,
it was out.
That was that big vacant lot at the time.
Yeah, but it was where that parking lot is now.
Yeah, I remember because it started out. I remember it used to be underneath the stadium.
Yeah, well, I don't remember it.
That was way back.
Yeah,
then they moved out to that big lot.
You know more about it than I do.
Well, I just remember, and they moved out to that big lot, and then Vanderbilt said we need to build this.
I took Tootie Bradford. We had to go before the beer board. You can imagine Tootie Bradford at the beer. All these seedy looking people there at the beer board.
I've been to the beer. I've been to the beer board.
Yeah. Anyway, that was interesting. Well, anyway, that was memorable. But anyway, we got our beer permit, and that's what the junior chamber did. We sold beer. I was really good at selling beer. I could change out a keg like nobody's business, and so we did that for a long time. And then I was involved in the Clinic Bowl, and I started. Like I said, I didn't do it in '74, but it started in '75. I started doing it, and I worked in various capacities as on game day activities, and about 1982, the Clinic Bowl really took a step upward. Scooter Clifford, who was a big Republican fundraiser, was the chairman of the Clinic Bowl, and he got Minnie Pearl to be, I think she was a good friend of his mother's, to be the honorary chairman, and we were able to turn the Clinic Bowl into the state championship football games. So we had all the games. We had all 3 games, maybe 4 games. I can't remember how many. I don't know how many divisions there were. I think there were just 3. We had all 3 games, and we had to set up the organization for all that. I was in charge of that, and so I had an outline that Tom Weaver had done the year before when it was just like a quarterfinal game, and so I just increased it in. But I used generally his outline, and I increased it by 3, and so we were able to do 3 games, and it came off pretty well. So the next year I was co-chair of the Clinic Bowl, and I had that part of it. And Steve Condorellis, who owns a Keller Williams dealership, Keller Williams agency here in Nashville, I think the one in Green Hills. He was the other co-chair. Tandy Rice was our honorary chairman, and so I was that was an interesting year because it rained cats and dogs that day, and it was a miserable day. I mean, the receipts for the game day were not very good, and I remember seeing Knoxville Austin East was it was a black school out of Knoxville. And I remember them out there. They had this band director named Cleophas, and he was out there, and he had the band out there on the field. It was raining so hard. I mean, I was up in the press box. I could hardly see him because it was raining so hard. And then Cleophas was going crazy out there. So he was quite a day. But anyway, that was a big event, and it took a lot of planning, and that was right before I got elected to the board of the National Bar Association. My picture was in the paper several times. I guess I got a lot of favorable publicity for a change, and so when Leda Arthur, who is now Leda Trogger, federal judge here in Nashville, she was on the board, and she was married to this fellow. I guess his name was Arthur. She was a Leda Arthur at the time. I think he moved to South Carolina, so she resigned, and so they had a special election to fill her spot, and I got a call, and I was going to run against Karen Coble, and Karen Coble was Jim Dale's sister, and Mr. Dale, who was the clerk and master and a lawyer in Nashville. That was his daughter, and that was in 1983, and I prevailed in that election, so I got elected to the board of the Bar Association. So that was part of my junior chamber stuff, and then I was elected to the board of the junior chamber 3 times, and then from there, one thing that came out of the junior chamber was I got pretty close with the director of the physical therapy clinic at Vanderbilt, because they were the beneficiary of the Clinic Bowl, and we had a lot of events that were, where the physical therapy clinic was involved, and so somehow he recommended me for this position on a committee at the Vanderbilt Hospital, the medical center, for the ability assessment commission at Vanderbilt Hospital. So I served on that for several years. And they asked me to do it, and I did it, but I thought, but you should have a workers' comp lawyer or somebody doing this. I mean, I don't know that I'm the right person, but since they asked me, I wasn't going to turn it down, so I did that. And then after I finished with the junior chamber, I aged out at 35. The 2 things I did, one was I joined the Sons of the American Revolution, and the second thing was I joined the Knights of Columbus. And the Sons of the American Revolution, my mother had been a member of the DAR, so I was able to use her application, and it didn't take long for me to get admitted to the SAR. And I just passed the 40-year mark as a member of the SAR, and so now I'm an emeritus member of the SAR in Florida, so I don't no longer have to pay any dues there. But I was, as an SAR member in Nashville, I was president of the Andrew Jackson chapter, which is here in Nashville. And then I went on to be president of the Tennessee Society SAR. And then about 6 or 7 years later, I became vice president general for the Southern District of the NSSAR. And at the same time, I was asked by the then President General Rice Aston, who was out of Houston, if I wanted to be their Attorney General, basically the Advocate General. And I turned it down. I said, I'm going to be the Vice President General this year, and I did not want to try to do two of those things at once. I got to practice law. I got to make a living, So I did do that, and that would have been my chance to go in and be the maybe be the President General of this organization. But I didn't think I was a good fit for that anyway. So I was happy to do what I did, and a friend of mine, Larry McClanahan, who started the Sumner chapter of SAR. He became President General in 2002, and the NSAR had their national convention. They called it a Congress, a national Congress here in Nashville. And I was the host chair of that event. They had 500 plus people here, and they had events all week and all that stuff. And we had planned all that. And it was a big event. It took a lot of time. My wife Cindy and I worked on it for a year or so to get that done. It's very gratifying to do it, but it sure was a lot of work, and it took a lot of time out of my law practice too. So then, as far as the Knights of Columbus is concerned, I was a member of the Council 544, which is the oldest council in the South, and that's the Council 544. That's the number of the where you came in, the order in which you came into the Knights of Columbus. And I know my brother Chris joined the one at Christ the King after he'd been in 544. I think it was 12,000 something. So you can see how it had fit in the order. And so I was advocate there for 15 years, and I had a few lawsuits. Several times I had to go before the Alcohol Beverage Commission and get things squared away with them. And then I had a big lawsuit with St. Thomas Hospital, and that was when St. Thomas had their building on Harding Road ran right next to Bosley Springs Road. And so they decided Bosley Springs Road is where they went into the clubhouse for the Knights of Columbus, and they decided they're going to reroute that road. And they didn't have a right to do that, and so the Knights of Columbus, I was counsel for them. I filed a lawsuit against St. Thomas, and John Connors started representing them at first, and I thought I was going to get an injunction, but John Connors comes into court, and people really listen, and I had certainly had the better of the argument, but I didn't. I had a judge that knew John Connors, and he was favorable of John Connors. So I didn't get the injunction and all stuff. I know, but I was up at the Court of Appeals in the library of the Supreme Court building. So Ben Capsule, he said, I see you filed a lawsuit. Catholics are fighting the Catholics. So yeah, so you shouldn't talk about it too much. Might be heading up your way at one point. That's the only comment he made about it. But now I suggested that it might come up in his area. So that was our conversation about it terminated. Yeah. But anyway, we ended up winning that case. But that took a lot out of me. It was a terrible case, and St. Thomas just tried to bully the Knights of Columbus, and eventually we were able to stop them. But they were determined they're going to reroute that road, and so they could build another entrance to the hospital. And there was some kind of compromise. They were able, we didn't let them do what all they wanted, but they got some sort of access off of it. So, but anyway, it was satisfactory.
Okay. And several years ago, you and some of your classmates at Ryan, Tommy Ducklow and Little Host Apple were very instrumental in raising a good chunk of money for Ryan, were you not?
Yeah. Well, actually, Paul Rowling was a classmate of mine at Christ the King, along with Tommy Ducklow and Morgan Holzapfel. We all started the first grade together. And we went through 12th grade together, went all through Christ the King, went all through Father Ryan. Paul was the first development director at Father Ryan. They may have had somebody that was up there calling for money, but anyway, they never had an office, like a development office, that before. And so Paul came in. I guess I was one of the first people he called, or maybe somebody else called me. Anyway, I get a call every year because David Bohan, David has an advertising agency here, and some guy named Pentecost that I think the guy must be in his 90s or something. I think he graduated I think in the 50s sometime. Oh, excuse me, in the 40s. I think he must be at least 95 years old. We are the longest consecutive givers to Father Ryan. I think this year we hit 45 years. We've been giving 45 consecutive years. But anyway, Paul called me before our 50th reunion. I think it was maybe, let's see, that would have been it would have been 2017. So he called me maybe the beginning of 2016. He said, listen, we need to do something for our 50th reunion. And I'd like to see if we could raise a scholarship. He said that, $50,000, I think we could do that. I said, well, yeah, I said, I'd like to do that. I'd like to help. And I found out a lot more about it. Of course, we went over to Father Ryan, and I think at that time, they pretty much told us that we can't support you, but we'd be happy for you to do it. But if we try to make it some kind of a school project or a school supported effort, that the bishop would get mad because he's trying to raise money for this and that, and he would think that was a conflict. And I said, well, we're just doing this on our own. He said, well, that's fine. You just do it on your own. I said, well, how much you got to have? He said, 50,000. So we think we can get 50,000 together. So we were at, Paul and I went around and talked to people. And I think Tommy was one of the first people we talked to. And Paul pledged money, I pledged money, Tommy pledged money. And then we had a group of people that would eat breakfast together at that time. And all the people at the table, Mike Martin and Bill Hunt, Bill Hunt's brother, Jimmy Hunt, had an insurance agency here. Bill has a little shop that does sort of electronics and lamps and all that stuff on Hillsborough Road. And his father was Sam Hunt, that was worked for Third National Bank. Bill was at the table, and let's see who else. Can't think of anybody else. Anyway, there were 5 of us that we all pledged some money, and then we went out to other people that we knew of that were doing quite well in business. We got them, and then we Paul got some other people, and I called some people, and anyway, by the time that our 50th reunion rolled around in June of June of 2017, we raised 150,000. So we were quite proud of that. And here's the thing: the TSSAA, they didn't like it that people were getting scholarships because they thought people getting scholarships were being paid to play football or basketball or something. So they divided the schools up according to some schools that had scholarships and other schools that don't have scholarships. And so in order to give a scholarship to somebody, they have to go through this process. They have to answer these questions, and everybody uses the same system. And they decide based on the finances of the parents, how much help they're going to get from assistance. And so MBA and Father Ryan and all these other schools, they're all on the same system. But the difference is that MBA's got unlimited funds, and Father Ryan never had all the funds that they needed to be able to support all the aid that was needed. And so that's why we were trying to put things on a level playing field, because we'd heard stories about some people that want to send their children to Father Ryan. They couldn't get the money at Father Ryan, but so they ended up going to MBA because they got all the money that they needed, or all the money that they were allowed at MBA. They couldn't get that at Father Ryan. So that's one of the things we were trying to raise some money for, for that scholarship. And as a matter of fact, Paul called me about 6 months ago, and we talked about doing another effort for our 60th reunion, which would be coming up in 27. So yes, we did raise some money for Father Ryan, and we hope to raise some more for him, because it's important to me that these families that want to send their children to Father Ryan to get the Father Ryan education are able to do that. And it's a shame that the tuition has to be at a level that they a lot of these families can't do it. And it's not the same. It's the same at every one of the private schools in Nashville. All of them, the tuitions are just out of sight, and quite different than it was when I went to Father Ryan. I just want to tell you, when we started at Father Ryan, Paul Rowling was telling the story that of course the faculty was all clergy. They might have there were maybe two lay people, all clergy, so they didn't have to pay any teacher salaries, because the diocese were paying paying the teacher, paying the priests and all stuff, and the nuns. And the tuition at Father Ryan when we started was $100 a year for the first child. If you had a second child in Father Ryan, it was only $50. And after the second child, if you had more, it was free. So Paul had three of, there were three of his family. It was $150 tuition for all three of them.
So Mr. Hosapple cleaned up on tuition.
I guess he did, until they changed that system. I guess because how many children they had?
12, 14?
It's probably 16.
15 or 16.
Yeah. I know Hosey Hosapple, who was the coach at Father Ryan, he was in my brother's class. They were in the Father Ryan class of 1959. Anyway, when he was, I guess he was going to Christ the King. My brother's going to Christ the King. Or maybe they were there at Father Ryan. But anyway, he came over to the house to spend the night. And my mother said, well, just being friendly. She said, you have any brothers and sisters? He said, yes, I have 11 sisters. And she said, what? You have 11 sisters? Yes, I'm not sure she was really buying that at first. I don't think she thought that was possible. I don't know how many brothers he had at that time, but he said 11 sisters, and that knocked her out of the box.
A lot of people.
Yeah.
No, I met Susie Hosapple when I was in Knoxville, and she told the story. She's one of the younger ones, and she told the story. It got to the point that the older ones were taking care of the younger ones because the mother was just worn out.
Yeah, I know but they weren't the biggest family at Christ the King. The Lyles were the biggest family. I think they may have had 17 or something. I said they had a living room and they had I understand. I never went in their house, but I think they had a picnic table or two, and that's where they'd all eat. I mean, he owned a laundry or something. I guess you can afford to feed a big family like that, but man,
I
that's
know, the guy that runs the camp, what's his name? The guy for, I think he's from Memphis, no, he's from here, runs Marymount.
Bill.
Yeah, Tommy Hagee,
Tommy
yeah, his
Hagee.
wife's Margaret, I met
Yeah.
them, yeah, they got like 14, 15 kids.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then he used to, they used to go out there every summer, you know, they're grown now, but they used to go every summer and they spend the summer, the
Yeah.
whole family spend the summer at,
Well, when I was a kid, all my brothers and I went to Camp Marymount, and my uncle, Father Hofstetter, he was administrator of the camp when we were there. I mean, I think that Father Rowling, it's then it was Monsignor Rowling. I think he got the money for the camp. He may have sort of founded it, but my uncle, Father Hofstetter, was the administrator for many, many years. And Tommy Hagee, that when they had an event out there, maybe about 2012, and they were dedicated Hofstetter Hall to Father Hofstetter at that time, and he Tommy Hagee was he felt like that he was Father Hofstetter was he was the godfather of Camp Marymount. Matter of fact, one of Cindy's friends, Janet Jordan, they were up in Oak Ridge at one time, and they sent they sent their daughter down to Camp Marymount, and so they have these ghost stories that they tell. And I said, then she came back. She said, "Oh, the clock just ate Father Hofstetter," and she said, "I don't think so. Father Hofstetter was saying mass up here last weekend."
You're talking about tuition. I went to MBA in '64, graduated in '68. My father told me tuition may be topped out at $500 a year. I went to the University of Tennessee. Tuition was $90 a quarter and $15 a quarter for activity fees, $105. He said tuition at MBA was more than tuition at the University of Tennessee.
Well, I mean, of course, it probably still is. It
Uh,
probably a lot more now.
well, everything's multiples.
Yeah, I mean, Innsworth, I'm sure that's like going to a private university.
Innsworth, MBA, Harpeth Hall, USN are all pretty much knocking at the 30,000 a year door.
Yeah, I mean it's not like Vanderbilt or some of the Ivy League schools, but it's certainly more than any state school.
What was when you went to Vanderbilt? What was tuition? 5,000?
No, I'm thinking it was 1,600.
1,600, yeah. Back then, that's what. Yeah.
Of course, I went 7 years. I'm not like John Belushi in Animal House, who said 7 years down the drain. No, I went 4. I got an undergraduate degree and a law degree there.
I graduated the University of Tennessee in December of 1972, and there was a guy that was in my grouping that went 10 years nonstop and got his PhD that day.
Oh, wow. How about that? Well, there was a guy that we knew that was like a floor advisor, and he'd been up there he'd been to Vanderbilt 6 or 7 years working on something. I don't know, but I don't know if he ever finished. But I'm proud of the guy that hung in there for 10 years to get it.
Oh yeah. Okay, now you're pretty much retired now.
I am retired.
And you're retired and you're living where now?
I'm living in Fernandina Beach, Florida. I'll tell you about that. When I quit practicing, you know, we had our legal malpractice with CNA, and CNA had this policy that if you retired and you'd been with them for 2 or 3 years, that they would give you a free tail policy. to cover anything after after you retired. But you couldn't do anything. You could do some pro bono work but you couldn't do anything for money. And so when I retired in 2019, I knew I was not going to be working for compensation, but I thought I might do, there might be a case where I want to get in there and do some pro bono work. And so I think last year I had some discussions with the people from the Legal Aid Association down in Jacksonville Legal Aid, and they have an office in Fernandina, and basically they would give me coverage while I was working there. But I mean, once I quit doing cases, I wasn't covered, and that thing is legal malpractice. Their insurance is claims made, and you got to have coverage, and so I wasn't going to be covered by anything. And I said, I worked hard to get to have absolute coverage. I'm not going to put myself in a position where somebody could bring a claim and it could come after me personally. So I decided not to do that. So yes, I am fully retired, but I do have a Florida license where I passed the bar in 1992, and I have an Alabama license, but right now it's special. But I passed the bar in Alabama in 1993. So I've been licensed in 3 states, but I ain't retired. And we moved in 2019. We bought a place in Fernandina Beach, this Amelia Island, in December of 2018, and then in June of 2019, when I retired, we moved everything down there, and I've been down there ever since. And I just come up for special events like I'm here today. So yesterday we got our 50-year award with the National Bar Association. That was the 3rd generation to get that. My father and my grandfather both got that award. So it was special to me, and I wanted to be here. So, and for it, I got to see you and some other friends, old friends. And there were 12 of us last night that were emeritus members that showed up. And of those 12, 6 of them were from our class. So that was
was you, there was General Creasy.
Jim Creasy and
Was Ralph in your class?
No, Jay Bowen,
was in your class?
and Torrey Johnson, the former DA, and then over at the other table there was Lee Maddox and Larry Stewart, who was with Stokes and Bartholomew. Whatever firm that is now, Adams. That could be Adamson Reese.
I've lost track, and I hadn't seen Larry Stewart in forever until last.
It may. That may be the reason. I saw Lee talking to. I heard Larry Stewart was there, and I looked over at this other table, and I saw Lee. I hadn't seen Lee in 50 years, I was at the Vanderbilt.
Lee Barfield.
No, Lee Maddox.
Lee Maddox. That's right.
Yeah, he went to the David Lipscomb. He was a Nashville guy. And, he went to Vanderbilt Law School, and really nice guy. And I saw him, and we talked extensively at our 50th law school reunion, which was last month. It was in November of 2024. And so then I saw him again, last night, the first time I'd seen him, when I saw him in November, the first time I'd seen him, I think since we graduated. And but I had sent him some cake because he was telling me that. I said he worked in the legal office for Chattanooga, and I guess that's Hamilton County, whatever the law office is for the county. And then he went into private practice, and he said I sent him his first case. It was a dog bite case. And we just talked about general things, about also the fact that he grew up in Green Hills, which is where I grew up. And so it's fun catching up with him. And he was sitting at the table next to Larry Stewart, who was also in our class. And I began to think maybe that Lee and Larry both work for the same firm now. And that's, they may have seen a lot of each other. So anyway, that's the six that were there from our class.
Okay.
And the other ones, you know, there was Ralph DeMarco. I guess Ralph went to Nashville School. I'm not sure where he went. He was I think he's Dave Rutherford's nephew, and I think Dave Rutherford's sister. I think one of the Rutherfords married DeMarco's father,
Okay.
and so I think that's how he got into that firm. And let's see who else was at the table.
David
Oh,
Ravens.
Raven. I think he went to. I guess he went to UT. I don't know where he went. WT.
I don't know where David went.
And Patsy Cottrell was there, but I don't know why she was there because she wasn't an emeritus member. I don't. But I guess they just had an extra seat, so she decided to take it or something. And then who else? Let's see. Jim Barry was there he was a Bass Berry and Sims guy. He was a Vanderbilt undergraduate. I think he went to Duke Law School. And let's see who else. Right now, I can't think of who else was at that other table. Anyway, it was a really good group, and there were a lot of other lawyers in Nashville that were eligible. They just didn't come. I mean, Jim Creasy and I talked about this morning. Lee Barfield and Bob Buchanan and Mike Peake and Henry Martin. Henry Martin was signed up to be in our reunion. He didn't show. He's the federal public defender here. Jack Stringham, and Jack did come to the reunion, and those other ones. I didn't see Mike Peake there, but Bob Buchanan was there at the reunion, and so was Lee Barfield. And when I was on the bar board, I got elected to the bar board the same year as Barfield and Tori Johnson. So there were three of us from the same class that were elected at the same year. And Barfield went on to become president of the Bar Association. So I was kind of surprised he wasn't there, but he's involved with the Nashville Sports Council, a lot of other things.
I understand. I happened to be at a luncheon with him about 6 months ago by happenstance. And best I understand, he's one billionaire away and permission from Major League Baseball of having a team in the city.
Yeah. What he said in his thing was that we're looking at an expansion team.
Yeah.
And that the rumors about the Tampa Bay Rays and the Chicago White Sox were sort of unfounded. So that he thinks we might get an expansion team around 2030 or something like that. I just always been skeptical of that idea because I don't know that Nashville has, particularly with these other sports, where you got a professional football team and a professional soccer team, hockey team that at least used to be good and popular. And not this year. I don't know how popular they are. I guess they still got maybe sellout crowds, but they're not playing very well. They're at the bottom of the league just about.
They're the worst team in the league. The Titans are trying very hard to be the worst team.
Yeah. Well, they might not. They might be better than the Titans. The Titans are really they are the worst.
I'll put it this way. I would be apt to go to 12 Major League Baseball games in a year long before I'm going to spend money to go see the Titans right now.
Well, I understand, but there are only so many dollars that people have, and you know how expensive all those games are, and it's one thing to have a sport where the team's going to play of 11 games here, or a hockey, I don't know how many, that's 50, but Major League Baseball, you're talking about 81 games in the regular season, and then, expansion teams don't. But anyway, trying to fill up that stadium or get a satisfactory crowd for 81 games that's a hard thing to do. You got to have a huge population that's interested. And I just never have thought that Nashville was a good city for that. if we didn't have the football team or the hockey team, I might be able to make a go of it, but. We've already, now we got the soccer team and they pretty much stink too. I saw the article in the paper about how pathetic, the guy said Nashville's got the most pathetic, sports teams in the country.
There was an article in the New York Times Sports last Sunday recapping the time before the games last Sunday. Said they ought to give away the tickets to the Jacksonville, Tennessee game. That'll be free.
Yeah, well, no, actually, they ought to pay you to go to it.
Pay you to go. I had tickets and I didn't go. I didn't feel like going out there.
Yeah.
Just, not a good thing.
Well, they talked about how, at least in one drive I think it was in the second quarter that they had an open receiver in the end zone and Levis didn't even see him.
Well, if he kicked the field goal, at the end of the game, he only would have needed a field goal to win the game, but whatever.
Yeah, well, but whether they could have gotten a stop or
But
not.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's always a pleasure to have you in Nashville. The Bar Association appreciates your coming, giving your oral history, which you will now be part of a rotation that will be available from time immemorial for all the lawyers that pass through this city and are members of the Nashville Bar Association. We thank you for your participation. And is there anything you could think of you would like to add? Any notable people?
As far as lawyers are concerned, I just feel like that things work a lot better and the law's a lot more fun when you treat people fairly and you keep your word and you try to be a lot more like Mr. Kate than try to react to some of the rude behavior of other people. Don't take it personally and sometimes you can change people's attitudes and we could have a more collegial bar if people would try not to react and just try to just make a extra effort to get along even with people that are unpleasant. And it's easy to say disagree without being disagreeable, but it's hard to do. But if you can do that, the practice of law is a lot more pleasant for everybody involved.
Amen to that, brother. With that, I thank you for your time. And this will conclude this oral history.
All right. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.